Okay, welcome. This is the scientific perspective on Jediism and the Force, and I am an apprentice Tavi. I am from Tocho and Legacy. I realized last workshop I didn't introduce myself. um, so I studied in college biology. My focus was in animal biology, but that also involved taking a bunch of other sciences. And I also went to school for teaching. So hopefully I can get this concept across as simply as possible. So the first thing I wanted to start with is talking about force. What is a force and what is the force? And can we make sense of a philosophical idea in terms of science, in terms of a physical idea? So I have notes. Hopefully I can stay organized this time. All right, so the definition of a force it's a push or a pull. So F equals ma. I'm not going to go into the math too much because that's going to scare people. But basically, to give an object motion, you have to apply a push or a pull. So I've got my little, if my camera will work with me, my little ball here. So to set this ball in motion, I have to give it a push. Or like with this pen, give it a pull. So those are the two basic examples of a force, like a scientific force. Getting a little deeper into it, so force is a vector quantity, which means it has magnitude and direction. So it has a physical presence and it's going in a direction. That's all that means. So there's two types of force. There's a force at contact. So when I push the ball, my hand is physically touching it and causing it to move. And then there's a force with no contact. So best example of that, well, one example would be me taking the ball and dropping it. So I'm not creating the force is the gravity pulling it back down. Another force would be with a magnet where, I don't know if I can show this. Let's see. All right, so here's my magnet and here's my metal thing. So they don't ever touch, but they still pull towards each other. So there's a magnetic force happening there. Really hard to show these. So I took a lot of notes, but I'm trying to keep it simple. Okay, so there's several different effects of a force, but I'm going to focus on just 5 of them. So a force can set a stationary object into motion, like pushing the ball. It can also stop a moving object. So when I roll the ball and I stop it with my hand, that's applying an opposite force and it stops it. It can also change the speed of a moving body. So if the ball is rolling and I hit it again and I increase the speed, that is also a force. It can also change the direction. So if the ball is rolling and I hit it a different direction, it can also change dimensions. For some reason in my notes, I wrote like a squish. So changing its dimension. So kind of overall definition of a scientific force. A force is a physical quantity that can be measured that changes or tends to change the state of rest or motion of a body or changes the dimensions of a body, like the ball. When there's multiple forces on an object, kind of like the changing dimensions, so you have an equal and opposite that'll cancel each other out. Call that net zero. An unbalanced force is required to set an object in motion. So when I hit the ball, there's nothing coming from this side. It's just a force in one direction. It's unbalanced. And that's important to how I'm tying this back into Jediism. Okay, I feel like that was a pretty basic explanation. Does that make sense to everybody?
I got you so far.
All right, that's pretty much as deep as I'm going to go with it. Just the basic concept of what a force is scientifically. And there's lots more information out there if you want to look on YouTube. And if you know about physics, there's probably a lot of other connections you can make as well. But so I wanted to look at Jediism using this concept of an unbalanced force being required to start the motion of a body. So a lot of the time when a person finds their life is in turmoil or it's unbalanced, they're moving in a direction, they're not moving in a direction that they'd like to be, they'll come and find the temple in Jediism. Another thing that I took too many notes about. So momentum is mass versus or times velocity. The rate of change of linear momentum of a body is directly proportional to applied force and takes place in the direction of the force. That's Newton's second law of motion, which is confusing unless you're reading it usually. But this ties in pretty well with the idea that when someone comes to the temple, it's the community, the lessons, and the leadership that are the applied force that are moving that person or that body in a direction. So this could be in any direction, light, dark, slow, quick. It depends on the amount of force applied to the body or the amount of time spent, the energy exerted, and the lessons provided. So to put it in more simple terms, the force is something that flows through us all. And when we join together as a community, we directly influence the energy exchange that happens within our communities. So when new people come in, they'll feel the energy or the force within our group. So like most of my workshops, I want to make this more of a discussion. So when we think about the force as more than just a philosophical idea, but as a physical energy that each of us can directly influence based upon our movements, behaviors, and time spent with others. How can we as individuals within our communities best apply the force to those around us so we may reach maximum momentum or growth within the case of Jediism? If anybody wants to comment on that, do the raise hand thing. Keeps it less chaotic.
Sorry, can you please repeat the question?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about the force as more than just a philosophical idea, but as a physical energy that each of us directly influence based upon our movements, behaviors, and time spent with others, what can we be doing as individuals within our communities to best apply the force to those around us so that we may reach maximum momentum or growth within the case of Jediism? So what can we be doing within our communities to be that forward momentum, that force? It's a very broad question. There's not like a specific answer that I'm looking for. Yeah, Russ?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that the main thing that I've tried to do is just like try to create opportunities and spaces for people to engage.
Yeah, for sure. So those opportunities are kind of the forward momentum, the push that people need to go in a direction. Tavi?
Yeah, I would just say to add on to that, as well, engaging in those things that are set up to be engaged with. So showing up and participating and being there.
Yeah. So did anyone else want to comment on that question? It's a super broad one, so.
Also, I would say like don't hold back ideas if you have them, because a lot of the time people feel like they might have something they want to share or engage with, and they don't feel like it's worthy or something. But a lot of the time people find benefit in things that, because you may think something's nothing, but to them it might be really interesting. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So going back to kind of the idea that when we engage with the Force, it's kind of more in terms of this physical plane. We are physically applying a force to our communities, to the individuals within our communities. Do you think that it's our responsibility as Jedi to be aware of the physical force and how it directly influences and changes our mental state as well as that of those around us? So when we create lessons or we run workshops or study halls, that is essentially the force that I'm talking about. That is the physical force. It's not just this idea of, the force is the energy that's around us. It's literally us making the force something that is physical and present. Does that concept make sense? The connection there?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, so Obi-Wan's quote about the Force, he says, "The Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together." So I'm going to move on to the next topic. So this one's more kind of a psychology perspective, I guess. So in the movies and in the lore, there's Jedi mind tricks, and these are not the droids you're looking for. Is like the most, I think, recognizable one. But it's actually a very real thing. The power of suggestion is the real psychological phenomena. We also, our expectations can lead us to lean towards a certain outcome or a certain behavior. In that instance, when Obi-Wan is talking to the stormtrooper, I like to think that the stormtrooper has been like standing out in the sun all day and he's trying to find these two droids, and he already believes that he's not going to find them, or he's just like ready to go home. So when Obi-Wan suggests that they're not the droids that he's looking for, he's just like, yeah, okay. So the power of suggestion, that's something that is very real. There's a couple other examples too. Luke and Jabba's fortress with Bib Fortuna. When he walks up to Luke, he doesn't immediately like freak out and sound the alarm. He talks to him. So when Luke was direct, he was already leaning towards allowing Luke to talk to Jabba because he didn't want to die. So that suggestion was still there.
Sorry. I'll mute. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. So while I was looking at that kind of idea, the more like psychological connection or connection to psychology, I found the Milgram experiment, and this one's a little disturbing, but it's also cool. So the participants in the study thought they were shocking a stranger with higher and higher voltage levels as a scientist urged them on. The participants continued to shock the other person even after the other person stopped responding. And it's because they believed that the scientist that was in charge, that was telling them to keep shocking the person, was the expert and in control of the situation. So even if they thought the other person was dead from the shocks, they kept doing what the scientist said. So the scientist was perceived to be the authority figure, the one with the power. So I kind of related this experiment to like when, well, in the movies when they say that they're using the dark side. what do you think is different when this element of authority is used to sway someone to do something that completely goes against what they believe or may cause harm to others? How do you think that happens? Still tying it back into the kind of force and momentum.
It feels like an outside force as opposed to their own impetus, I guess you could say. So it makes it easier for them to not feel like they're the ones doing it because they're being told to.
Yeah, for sure.
And I guess that like the magnitude of that force is greater if it's coming from an authority figure. And so any resistance that they may have is of a lower magnitude in the opposite direction. And so the imbalance is that the authority is pushing them toward what the authority wants.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the connection I made there too. Can never tell who had their hand raised first.
It was
Mhm.
Nightbrow.
Okay.
I can't see it.
I think it puts them in order. I think I've noticed that. Like if you raise it, it puts the top person first, I think.
It keeps changing around for me, so I'm not sure. But I think Nike was next. Oh, you're muted.
Were you asking just in general or related specifically to that instance?
Well, both. Yeah.
Um, I think fear is a motivator. Not specifically in that instance. I think, maybe the person was, kind of fearful that they were, hurting the other person, but had the authority figure like, no, this is fine. But I think playing off of people's fears is definitely a huge way to influence them, even if the fear or the potential harm isn't real, just kind of that thought, the possibility of something potentially happening is definitely a motivator for people to do things that they otherwise would not be comfortable doing. Kind of backs them into a corner, puts them into a situation that between a rock and a hard place, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you think that that's always a bad thing? Do you think that not that fear necessarily, like using fear is a good thing, but creating a situation where there's a motivator.
I guess it depends on the person because obviously fear's a good thing. Fear keeps you alive. Fear keeps you from doing stupid stuff, but definitely, I guess only speaking for myself, fear has never been like a really great motivator for me. I'm more motivated by like example. Like, I don't even, being like a sports guy, the normal sports thing is like, we're hyping each other up, we're pushing each other around. That's never even really been a motivator for me either. I'm more motivated by excellence and example and kind of like that kind of stuff. So fear for me would demotivate me. It'd kind of like, you know, put me in a state of just kind of being frozen, like, so I don't know, speaking just for myself, I don't know if fear would be a great motivator. I think it could be for some people. It's kind of like that excitement that can come with fear, like you see the videos of people doing like bungee jumps and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm scared. I'm so scared, but and then you just go because they don't want to be in that situation anymore. So it's like, well, I'd just rather just do this and get it over with. So I guess in some situations, but not for me at least.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of the idea of psychological manipulation instead of like real leadership. That you're appealing to someone's emotions rather than the logic. And like, I think fear and anger is definitely a way that is kind of, those are things that are misused to get people to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. Yeah. Ellie. Yeah.
So Milgram experiment is a very interesting one for me. I actually have that as a study for anybody that goes through the, like, it's, if you go through the workbooks that I have published, that's one of the studies that you're supposed to do if you like want to get everything out of it. And I agree that fear is definitely a strong motivator when it comes to that as being a thing. When is there, I feel like fear is only appropriate when it's a life or death situation. And to give you an example, there are times when, like, so as a soldier, we would hear stories. I never went outside the wire, but so I would only hear stories. I don't have firsthand knowledge. When you go outside the wire and you're like the first time and you hear gunfire, and let's say that you don't fire back, that's a life or death situation. And if you're stuck in a confined vehicle where you can't go anywhere, and that thing is getting lit up and you're the person that's supposed to be protecting everybody in your vehicle. I'm sure some of you guys can't relate to this concept, but try to bear with me. Having someone put the fear of God into you to tell you to fire that weapon so that they can protect the entire vehicle, that is about the only kind of situation I can see fear being an appropriate thing to put in. When it comes to the Milgram experiment, it absolutely had a lot to do with fear of pressure. And there was actually an argument for anybody that attended my class earlier on in this gathering on Jedi alliances in wartime. You might recognize Abu Ghra. And during Abu Ghra, when they were doing the trials, somebody who had done work on the Milgram experiment tried to argue in favor of the people who were on the lower end, like the privates and whatnot, that were getting told from higher echelons that they needed to continue doing this stuff by using the Milgram experiment and saying, look, the pressure just gets piled on top of people and they don't know what else to do. So they continue going. They just continue going. Actually, it might not be the Milgram experiment. There's a similar one in the Stanford prison experiment. That's the one.
Oh yeah, that's a different one. Yeah.
I have people looking at both of them, but they both, when you have someone pressuring you, you do have this interior fear because you know that they're over you and they can do something to you. So it makes it harder. And no one in a position of authority should ever exercise fear over anyone unless it is a life or death situation, in my opinion. That's
and it kind of, so the Milgram experiment was really interesting to me because it's talking about people kind of blindly trusting authority. And I think kind of what I got from it is that when you're in a position of power like that and in a position of authority, you have to understand, I guess, the person's motivation for the people under you, their motivation. And so if you do, it's really easy to take advantage by using fear to get them to do what you want. Almost to the point I'm trying to say. But yeah, I guess like relating that back to Jediism and kind of the question I was asking at the beginning, that as people in a position of authority at our temples, people are going to look to us and they're going to listen to what we say. And so we have a duty to be a good example for those people and to do what we say we're going to do, basically. I think that it is really easy, especially when you first kind of get into those positions. It is kind of easy to fall into that trap of thinking like, oh, I'm in charge of these people, so I can tell them what to do. But it's not necessarily the most Jedi thing to do. I do want to talk about that a little bit more, but Tavi, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Sure, yeah. Just wanted to add in as well that, fear is important, but more the knowledge of the fear, not necessarily the following the fear. So I would say that, fear is kind of focused on what could be, but it's not necessarily what will be. As Jedi, we kind of must remain focused on what is, while also remaining open to what could be, to better navigate what will be, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense or not to everybody, but it's okay to acknowledge that the fear is there, and to what listen to what it tells you, but it doesn't mean that outcome is necessarily the outcome that will be, but you have to remain open. You have to know that that the horrible outcome could always happen. So if you're aware of it, then at least as it comes, you can recognize the signs of it kind of, approaching you.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of an example of like a lot of people come into the temple and they are there because they have fears of their life is falling apart. And it is kind of our duty to welcome them and help point them in the right direction. And instead of trying to control exactly what path they take, be able to be there and be supportive. Kind of going back to the importance of understanding and knowing what manipulation is and how easy it is to fall into the trap of being manipulative to people. It is a way to get people to do the things that you want them to, but it's not truthful. And I think it goes very directly against what we believe as Jedi. But there's a really fine line between manipulation and trying to guide someone on their path. So another question I had is, how can we as Jedi make sure that we're not falling into the trap of manipulation over those we lead, and as well as from our leaders? So is it easy to tell when you are being manipulative, when you're engaging in manipulative behavior? What are the signs for you personally? You want something to get done, and there's several different ways to go about it. But how do you know if you're being manipulative or if you're being an actual guide to someone? Allie?
So I actually wanted to address the first question. I think that one of the strengths we have in a community is that we don't believe this is the religion for everybody. This is the path for everybody. That we're open and we allow space for people to say, okay, listen, I don't want to be Jedi. I've looked into it. I thought about it. Not really my thing. Okay, you can still hang out. We can still be friends. And I would love to learn from your perspective of things. And as long as we keep that open, I think that's one way that we prevent manipulation as a community as a whole. The other way, as individuals, is by simply pointing out, and this kind of piggybacks off of as a community, we tell people that, is by saying, listen, I'm just here to teach you what the path says. I want you to learn something from it, but I'm not committed to making you a Jedi. I am committed to teaching you about the Jedi path. So that's how I have always approached what I look at, and I help people explore whatever path that they want to. If it doesn't work out for them and they want to go to another path, that's fine. They learn something from me. That's all I really care about. Did you learn something while you were here? Whether it's this isn't the path for me, or I gained meditation techniques. But that's how I believe is one way to help prevent manipulation, is to just is in the way that we present it and make sure that people have space to be whatever they want and not force them into the moniker of, oh no, you have to be Jedi. I am complete.
Yeah. I just jumped around again. I guess Night V.
Sure, I can go. I think it's the in relation to the second question about when you know you're being manipulative. Um, I think half of it is intention. So obviously, it's like, why are you, you know, telling this person these things, or why are you putting them on a specific path? So yeah, half of it is definitely intention, you know, what it is, you know, that you're trying to help them accomplish. But intention isn't always intention doesn't always matter. You might have the best intentions, but you might be doing something detrimental to the person. You might have a specific idea of how this person can be helped. Um, and you might have a plan, you know, this is how I'm going to guide them, this is how I'm going to mentor them. But kind of like what we were talking about, or at least I was talking about, like motivation, you know, it's not always going to be motivating, it's not always going to be the right thing for them. So I think the other half of it is having empathy and familiarity with the person that you're engaging with. You know, putting yourself in their shoes, being aware of what's going to work for them. Because manipulation isn't always intentional. You know, I think that there's obviously manipulation that's bad. It's like, oh, I want this person to do something for me, so I'm going to trick them, or, you know, tell them what they want to hear, or offer them a reward or something like that. And obviously, you know, that kind of manipulation. But then, like I said, you might be manipulating them with the best of intentions, you know, trying to help them, but it doesn't work out that way. So I think, like I said, the other half of it would be um, knowing the person and having the ability to put yourself in their place.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's, at least to me, a huge part of why it's important to stay open-minded and also realize that while you might be the teacher, you still have a lot to learn from each person that you come in contact with. And at least for me, I think that that helps stay away from being manipulative, because you always have to be looking at yourself while also being a teacher. Roz?
I was gonna say the biggest thing that I can, biggest piece of advice I might be able to give is just to know that you can be manipulated. There's so much evidence out there that shows that the people who don't believe they can be manipulated are the ones who are more likely to be manipulated.
Mm.
And to know that you can be manipulating. So really taking into consideration when I made this decision, what were my thoughts? What are my goals? What is it that I want to do? Because it's so easy to be manipulating. I mean, for myself, it's so easy to be manipulating and then to be manipulated. Now, is it possible to be manipulated and not, and still, you know, kind of just be aware of it and still kind of let it go on? I mean, that's just a part of life. Like if I see a McDonald's, automatically I want a hamburger. Now, am I just gonna be mad at the McDonald's because they're very good at advertising and manipulating? No. I have to be aware that, oh, this may be like a trigger for me. And that's how life is, you know? Am I just not going to eat food ever, or not going to look at anything ever? That's not part of life.
Yeah, definitely. And it seems like a huge part of that too is whoa, thought just left my mind. um the intention, yeah. So the intention that you have, recognizing like as a teacher, as an individual within the community, what is your intention in being in the community or being a teacher? Are you there for yourself, for your own self promotion, for your own ego, or are you really there to connect with other people? Are you really there to see other people grow? I think that intention has a lot to do with recognizing if you're being manipulative or not. Druid?
I actually think Chris had his hand up before me.
Okay, it's really hard to tell in here. Chris, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. Thanks, Drew. The question was how you see yourself being manipulative, correct? Like how you catch it?
How to recognize, yeah.
Something that I notice is I'll catch myself being manipulative with the truth, where I'll say something that's true, but I'll leave out important details, or I'll word it a certain way so that it changes the way that it comes off. And the truth if I can quote something, the truth carries with it the ambiguity of the words used to express it. And so careful choice of how you speak to others and the things that you tell them is a big part of affecting the minds of other people. And I catch myself often, well, not often necessarily, but when I am being manipulative, it's usually I'm twisting the truth to serve my purposes, which is potentially, very, very dangerous to do to people, because you can set up expectations that don't necessarily come about, and it can cause disappointment and just generally bad experiences.
Yeah, totally. It kind of makes me think of Obi-Wan telling Luke that
I
Vader
was
had killed his
totally going to
father.
point that out. You got to
Exactly.
before me.
Technically not a
Very
lie, but
manipulative.
also not really the truth. Yeah, it's kind of manipulative. Let's see, Druid?
Yeah, I very much agree with the intention of why you're saying something. How you're saying it is a big way to know whether or not you're being a manipulator. If you're telling somebody something to get them to a certain place, whether that's the place you want them to be or where you think they want to be, but you don't know. If you're leading them with what you say, then you're manipulating them. If you're hiding part of the truth or hiding any information from them, then you're manipulating them. And on the Obi-Wan thing, Darth Vader himself said that he killed Anakin Skywalker. So was that really a lie on Obi-Wan's part?
I feel like they filled in the gaps there. It wasn't really said until later, but okay, fair point. Oh man, it's always the psychology part that people are super excited about. Okay, I guess one more person, Tavi.
I guess I was also focused on the reason behind the communication. What is the purpose of why you're saying something to someone? Really, what's the intention, as we said. But beyond that, also sometimes there can be accidental information that gets across. So like people can say the wrong words even and not even realize that they said it, and then the next person's like, "Wait a minute, what did you just say?" And then it's just total confusion. So sometimes manipulation can appear as manipulation, but it's actually just more of like accidental, misconstrued information. So communication
Yeah.
is tough with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah,
out of
people
curiosity,
definitely-
does anybody get annoyed anytime someone says, "Oh, that was a Freudian slip"? Have you never had
being
that?
honest.
Have you guys never had that problem? Yeah, I hear that all the time. Like I hate hearing it when it's to me or to anybody else. It drives me
It's like,
crazy.
oh, you didn't mean to tell the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah, also on what Tavi was saying, it's definitely, I feel like a conversation that comes up a lot in discussion, well, at Tocho at least, that words mean something different to each person. There's a whole track of the studies at Tocho where you have one word and you have to explain what that word means and try to look at it objectively without putting your own thoughts and opinions into it. And it's really hard to do that because everyone has a different relation to certain words. So when you say something, you might think that you're saying one thing and the other person hears it a different way. So yeah, communication definitely really important. Accidental manipulation can definitely come out of that. So I'm going to move on to, I had one more thing that I was kind of going to actually talk about biology because physics and psychology were not the things that I really studied in depth. But I wanted to talk about the mammalian diving reflex. And so I studied biology, specifically zoology. So I did a lot of microbio and a bunch of evolutionary bio, animal behavior. So even if you don't agree, humans are animals, that's not what I'm talking about. The responses that we have make a lot of sense when compared to behaviors and physiological responses of other mammals. So I'm not talking about the more philosophical side of whether humans are animals. I'm just talking about the base understanding of mammalian responses. So it's important to understand that these behaviors are innate to us. So we don't necessarily notice, but they can cause a huge difference in our mindsets and our abilities to respond and react in situations. So in a lot of movies, there's a scene where the main character will look at themselves in the mirror and take a deep sigh. And like, that's super relatable, right? We've probably all done that before. So what's happening there is that it's a very real biological response that all air breathing mammals, so all of them, have. So when any part of a mammal's face is wetted, the body responds by directing more oxygen to the body's most critical organs. So this response is basically meant to prepare that mammal's body to be submerged in water. The psychological response to this is a deeply calming effect. So it's a survival mechanism, basically. It can also be used to help train the mind. So a really cool connection that I found there is that it's a thing that we use through yoga and meditation. And at least in the Jedi community, like, meditation is super common. Pretty much all of us have practiced it at some point. So we put a heavy focus on breathing to help train our mind and our body to be calm. So a follow-up question, I guess. So this tactic is useful in yoga and meditation. Do you think that there are other situations where we might be able to use this biological response to better respond to a situation as Jedi? I guess my mind kind of goes to conflict. And also, does that make sense? That was kind of a brief overview of what that response is.
The overview made sense. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking us though.
Yeah, so the question, having that information and understanding that when we take a breath, as you would in yoga or meditation, that it's a biological response, that it causes our bodies to become more calm. So there is a science behind why yoga, the breathing in yoga is so important, and the breathing in meditation. But I think that it has a lot of uses outside of those things as well. And conflict is the main thing that I was kind of thinking of. I'm sure there's a lot of other situations you could use that in, presenting maybe. But so the question is, how can we use that information, tie in this scientific concept and bring it into the Jedi community, the real world? I don't have a specific answer for that. Jared?
I agree with you. Conflict is definitely the first thing that came to mind, which is I think why most people are taking so long to think on this. But really, any kind of decision making that you go through, uh, anytime that you you have to deal with anything, you should always calm your mind first. Because if you're acting out of panic, if you're acting out of, as you mentioned earlier, fear or anything like that, then you may not be making the right choice. And by calming your body, you can allow your mind to move past your baser, more animal instincts and make a civilized choice, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it definitely helps us make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. Yeah, for sure. Carmen?
Hi, the whole technique of breathing in order to calm yourself, actually, that's self-treatment 101 for anyone who suffers any sort of PSTP, anxiety, depression, any of those situations where you might have something that you need to essentially treat yourself and calm yourself down, just so you can function and you can contribute to society and be able to turn yourself outward to get yourself out of your inward state. So first you have to calm yourself and treat your inward state so then you can turn your attention outward.
Yeah, and that's another great example of, using these biological responses of tying science back into creating better mindsets and physical well-being. That's kind of how I wanted to end this, is to ask y'all. I covered a little bit of physics, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of biology. It's all very surface level, and I'm sure that there's way deeper connections that could be made in other sciences that could be looked at. Are there any other connections that y'all made that I maybe didn't talk about, tying in the scientific world into everyday practices and I guess ways we can make the Jedi community better, function better within it? Chris?
Yeah, so there's a theory that was put forward asking if, or well, rather, there was a question that was put forward asking if all life on the planet is related to each other genetically. And they took samples from various different groups of animals, microbes, et cetera, compared the genetics, and they found that the most likely scenario based on looking at the genes is that there was one common ancestor. I mean, we can debate but just going with the theory, if there is one common ancestor, and we look at the way that within our own bodies, all of our cells have the same genetics, but they differentiate into specialized pieces called tissues, organs, etc., then by extrapolation, that would cause every creature, every plant, every microbe on the planet to be an extension of this one organism that has continued to propagate throughout all of the time that it's been on the planet. And for me, it's not like it's a solid theory or anything like that. It's got a little bit of support. but that strongly sounds like the unifying force to me. Because if we are literally from the same original being, then we are all brothers and sisters. We are all different parts of this one body that is life on Earth. And I think the spiritual implications of that are pretty immense as well. And it's like it's a piece of the puzzle of what the force actually is, in my mind. I look at a lot of scientific stuff like that tends to have that unifying flair to it, but I don't really have much to go on. It's just I thought it was interesting, something I think about often.
Yeah, and I love that concept. Just of everything being connected. I mean, we're all made up of pretty similar base building blocks. I don't know what word to use there, but kind of like at the beginning when I was talking about different types of forces, there's protons and neutrons that literally make up everything. And that's something that's within like everything that happens on the planet and off the planet. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to tie those more, I don't have the word for it, the more basic understanding of science as we know it, I guess. Just looking at how everything is connected and kind of like the life cycles too, how like humans have to eat food to stay alive, and then whatever we eat kind of becomes part of our body, and then the cycle just continues. Yeah. Tavi?
I just want to say thank you for revisiting my presentation. This is
Yeah. Yeah, when you were presenting, I was totally thinking about that.
I wasn't sure if the gentleman was his name Chris who was speaking before.
Mhm.
Just yeah, I wasn't sure if he missed my presentation or if he was there, but he definitely seemed to recap whatever where I was trying to go with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I missed it. Sorry. Great minds.
Y'all recorded though. Yeah. All right, well, that's pretty much all I had on this topic. Does anybody else have any last minute thoughts? I always feel like I should wait longer than feels comfortable just
Well, then if you do that, then people will just feel like they have to say something.
Which is very manipulative.
Oh,
Oh,
not in the act, don't know.
I really enjoyed, for sure. It's been really great.
Well, thanks
yeah,
for coming.
I loved it. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for the discussion. It's something I want to look into more. I know this is just like a super surface level of those ideas, just a thing that's been bouncing around in my head. So yeah, if any of y'all have any random thoughts, feel free to hit me up later and talk about them. Yeah, thanks for being here, y'all.